In this screencast, we are going to look at the calculation of take-home pay, the calculation of employer payroll expenses, and the journal entries that would be involved in recording these payroll expenses. Now, in a previous screencast, we began looking at problem 9-4B from Financial Accounting, Information for Decisions by John Wild. And in that problem, we looked at employee FICA withholding for Social Security and Medicare, employer FICA taxes for Social Security and Medicare, and also unemployment taxes, federal unemployment and state unemployment. And we calculated these amounts in this column. So we came up with employees FICA withholding for Social Security, which is 6.2% of pay. We came up with the employees FICA withholding for Medicare, which is 1.45% of gross earnings. And then we calculated the employer's FICA withholding. FICA was responsibility for Social Security and Medicare, which is the same as the employee's responsibility because employers and employees each pay 1/2 of Social Security and Medicare taxes. Then we also calculated the employer's federal and state unemployment taxes for this pay period. And as it happens, the only employee they had to pay unemployment taxes on was Hong, and that came up to a grand total of $9. So now we're going to look at the calculation of take-home pay. So when you sign a contract and you find out that you are going to get a weekly salary of, in Allie's case, $2,500, that's, of course, not what the check is going to be that you'll get every week. Instead, your employer is going to withhold certain things for you and then remit those things to the government or whatever entity they need to be remitted to. So what is left over, the check that you actually get, is your net take-home pay. So for us to calculate this, first we have to look at the gross earnings. And I put here the gross earnings of Allie, Eve, Hong, and Juan, and the total that we got over here under gross pay. And then we have to subtract out all of those things that our employer will withhold for us and then will later pay for us. They don't get to keep this money. They will pay it to the appropriate authority. So in this case, we have our FICA Social Security taxes, our FICA Medicare taxes, our withholding taxes, that would be for federal and state income taxes, and any health insurance. All of that is being withheld for us. So these amounts, the Social Security taxes came from this calculation up here. The Medicare taxes came from our calculation of employee responsibilities in this particular graph. Our withholding taxes came from our income tax withholding that was given to us in the problem, and our health insurance, we are told they pay $44 a week, and 1/2 is the responsibility of the employee. So that is that $22. So if you take the gross earnings, say, of Hong, $475, and you subtract out all those things that are withheld, you get down to $365. And this is the check that Hong would receive from his employer. Now, we're also going to look at employer payroll expenses. Now, what is the employer responsible for paying? Well, of course, the employer is responsible for paying employees their salary, and they have agreed to pay this amount. This is the gross pay. Now, this isn't the check they're going to write because they're going to do their employees the favor of withholding these taxes and health insurance amounts. But this is what they owe. This is their liability to their employees. This is their salaries expense for their employees. But then they also have other expenses that go with payroll because, of course, your employer has to pay FICA, Social Security, and Medicare taxes on all the employees. 1/2 of FICA taxes are paid by employer and 1/2 are paid by the employee. So those amounts are listed here. The employer has to pay federal unemployment taxes and state unemployment taxes. And of course, we calculated that Hong is the only employee that pertains to. And so $9 here. The employer pays half of the health insurance costs of the employees. That's this $22 a piece. And then also the employer has a pension contribution that they make of 5% of gross earnings. So this 125 here is 5% of 2,500, and that gives us our total. So although total earnings for employees is 5,090, the total payroll expenses that the employer has are actually quite a bit higher, 5,832. Now we are going to quickly look at the journal entries that the employer would have to make after calculating gross pay and all the payroll expenses. And the first thing that the employer would record is the salaries expense. And the salaries expense is the total that is promised to the employees, 5,090. So we would debit salaries expense. And then we would credit all these things that we are withholding for the employee. So we would have FICA taxes, which we can, well, I'm going to move this over slightly so it's easier to see. We can net the 316 and the 74 to 390. We will credit the withholding taxes, those income taxes that are withheld, which is $480. We can credit the health insurance payable. And actually, all of these I should have payable because this is a liability for our employer. And health insurance payable, the health insurance payable is $88. And the rest is the salaries payable. This is what the check will actually be. And the salaries payable is this take-home pay amount, $41.32. So that's the first journal entry that our employer would record. Now, the employer also has payroll tax expenses to record. And those payroll taxes are the FICA taxes payable that the employer needs to pay. So that is $390 because they have to pay the 316 and the 374. They also have to pay FUTA taxes. That's federal unemployment, and that amount comes from here. We'll say 9. We'll call it FUTA and SUTA. And that is all for our taxes, our payroll taxes. So that would mean that our debit is for $399. Our payroll tax expenses are $399. And then we owe the different taxing authorities $390 for FICA and $9 for FUTA and SUTA. Finally, we would have to do a journal entry for our employee benefits. And the employee benefits that this particular employer offers is health insurance. And so we will need to pay that off. And our retirement program. And the health insurance is the $88 in total. And the pension contribution is our retirement payable to $155, which gives us total employee benefits of $343. That is our expense. This is what we owe. We're not paying this in cash right away. We are accruing these things. And at some point, relatively soon, then we will debit these amounts and pay cash to the appropriate authorities. Now, this completes our screencasts on payroll taxes and also other payroll expenses.